She produced an article last week with Campus Rush on campusrush.com about Lisfranc injuries. Joan, welcome to BYU Sports Nation.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. What did you learn about Taysom Hill by doing this article? Because it sounds like you had some pretty good access to him in his recovery for what he hopes to be a healthy 2016.
Yeah, I got to spend, I was out there in Provo for about 2 days at the end of last month and got to spend, a good part of one of the days with Taysom. And when I went into, the visit with him knowing a lot about the injury. I'd done a fair amount of research. I talked to all the doctors who I cited in the article. So for me, it was more of a let's find out about his injury specifically and kind of who this guy is as a lens into the whole injury and the whole, everyone's experiences with it. And really just learned what a competitor he is. It seems like he is one of the, the fiercest guys out there and really just wants to do anything he can to play. And it was very interesting sort of learning how he's negotiated that really competitive spirit he has with the patience that's necessary with this injury and the fact that it is such a long recovery window and an uncertain recovery window. And that was really fascinating to me.
As you mentioned, and for those that read the article, clearly you did a lot of research about this. What was the genesis of this? What prompted you to try and dive into Lisfranc injuries in the history?
It's actually been kind of a years-long quest on my behalf, I guess. I used to live in Denver, and I covered the Denver Broncos for the Denver Post. And I was there in 2013, their Super Bowl run when they ended up losing to the Seahawks. And Champ Bailey had a Lisfranc injury, and he elected not to have surgery and went through the rehab, came back for the end of the season, playoff, Super Bowl, but wasn't the same, and then retired soon thereafter. And I got to know Champ pretty well during my time in Denver and just had talked to him off and on about the injury, especially after he retired. He said some things to me just about his foot and how he didn't think it would ever be the same, and just some really thought-provoking comments from him. And I've always been interested in the medical side of the game. I come from a pretty medical family. My dad's a doctor. My mom's a nurse. My grandpa was a doctor. My best friend's a doctor. So always sort of liked that angle. And in talking to some people on the medical side of things, realized, what Champ had told me about how complicated the injury was and how uncertain it is and how it can really derail careers. It just started fascinating me, and I started trying to reach out to some of the bigger name doctors who are associated with the injury, which was a kind of a longer process. And once I got the doctors I wanted to get, then I figured, all right, let's launch in and do this.
So when you look at Taysom Hill, one of the mentions in your article says how Lisfranc injuries have become one of the most feared yet least understood maladies in football. What did you gain understanding with Lisfranc injuries by doing this?
So the biggest understanding I think I gained about this was just the fact that diagnoses are on the rise, and it's somewhat precipitous over the past 10 to 15 years. However, it's hard to say where that rise is coming from in terms of a lot of it is they're just being better diagnosed, and trainers are better versed. Doctors know more. There's more medical literature out there. Yes, they're also going up in number because of other factors, perhaps shoes, perhaps players, increased size, perhaps playing surfaces. But what I really learned was this is an injury that is just becoming better known and better treated as time goes by. That said, it's such an injury that is so different in every athlete that we may never know a precise protocol to the point of what ACL rehab has become for these injuries. It'll never probably get that specific and that easy to lay out when a guy gets the injury.
Why is that, Joan?
So here's how I thought about it after talking to doctors. So if you think about an ACL injury, per se, that is one ligament. That's the anterior cruciate ligament. There are a million other knee ligaments that people have surgery on. We've all heard of, different knee surgeries. There's MCL injuries, there's, meniscus injuries, and all of those have different protocols. So the Lisfranc injury is just one specific part of the foot that gets injured. And so that's the first thing is the Lisfranc has so many different, it's one specific part, but there are so many different ligaments that can be injured. So even though you're saying Lisfranc, there's 5 different Lisfranc ligaments, and each one has, kind of controls a different toe. So therefore it depends on which one or ones are injured. And there can be so many different combinations. That's how I think about it. When you hear ACL, it's one specific ligament. This can be 2 of 5, 3 of 5, 1 of 5. It can be a bigger one, a smaller one, and there are so many different combinations out there that I think that's, at least from what I learned, part of the explanation for it. And I think there are a lot of other, factors at play, just how much bones are displaced because these ligaments are hurt. When you tear your ACL, your bones aren't displaced in your knee or your leg, and I think it differs so much for each person.
Do you know what, as Joan Niesen of Sports Illustrated joins us, wrote an excellent article on Lisfranc injuries last week. Do you know what ligaments he tore of those 5? Taysom Hill, that is?
So I do not know off the top of my head which ones he tore. I know that he tore them, whichever ones he tore them completely. So some guys don't actually sever. They just get really strained to the point that the bones can still displace themselves, if you understand what I'm saying. They're
right.
loose enough that the bones displace. His were fully torn. I did have that information, but I don't think that the trainer necessarily wanted me to publish it at the time, is what I think it was. I saw some of the images that they had on file there. But so in his case, they were completely severed, which is why he was able to go back in and play, which I wrote in the story, because he couldn't have done any further damage, is what they told him, to those ligaments, because once they're completely torn, what else can you do to them?
Right.
So if he strains, or I don't know what else you can do, as you mentioned, he's not going back in, but because he tears, he went back in and just was shot up and then somehow played the third quarter?
That's what I was told. And I think it also comes down to sort of a trainer's discretion. I think for some trainers, some medical staff, they might say, hey, don't go back in. From what I was told when I was out there in Provo, I think he was allowed to kind of make a decision based on the fact that, could this be the end? He's a senior. Is he going to hang up his cleats after this? And I think that factored into it a little bit. So obviously it's a decision that's made by multiple people and depends on the training staff. But yeah, that's how it was explained to me, just because there was nothing further he could do. Whereas if a guy has sprained it, there's a chance that, okay, he's going to go back out there, pivot wrong again, and completely tear it, and it's going to be even worse.
Joan, while you had mentioned that this injury is one of those that's just quirky because there's so many variables that play into it, the prognosis, though, in the piece you wrote, I think one of the doctors you spoke with said after 15 months, from the time you injure it to 15 months later, the chances are extremely high for you to be able to play without any significant decrease in performance. Why do you think that, for something that can be so catastrophic, why do you think we're not seeing the numbers decrease when these guys come back?
So I think the biggest thing is these numbers we're looking at in a lot of the studies I cited were the guys who had the injuries identified pretty quickly on, had surgery with the top Lisfranc surgeon out there, and returned. And a lot of these studies do look at that scenario where, it's identified, you have surgery, you return. And if you're under the care of the right trainers, you are in the right mindset, you want to come back, it can go pretty much to course. There are a lot of other outcomes, is kind of what I learned. You can have guys who don't have surgery and maybe should have had surgery, but at the time, the decision as to whether you're going to have surgery is, do I want to miss those 15 months? Or if you're Champ Bailey on a Super Bowl run and you're an older guy who might be at the end of his career, you don't want to miss those 15 months. So you play on and then realize, maybe I should have had something, maybe the course of action should have been different. Or, you look at guys who rush back. That's the other thing. That, the stats that were cited for the 15 months, those are guys who are under a very sort of prescribed course of action where they are not being rushed back to the game. You look at guys who, in the story I mentioned, a former BYU player, Craig Bales, who's Taysom Hill's brother-in-law, who tore it at his pro day and tried out for an NFL team 9 months later, and it didn't go well. He had some stress reactions because he rushed it a little bit. And, of course, that's human nature. But I think the biggest key in all of this is time and giving it the time to heal and knowing that time window they initially give you, it might take longer, and you're going to have to say, okay, I can handle that. I thought I'd be back for spring ball, but it's going to be training camp, and that's tough for guys to handle.
For Taysom specifically, he's one of those college players, and obviously at BYU they're a little older. He's going to be 26. So in his case specifically, from what you know about this injury and from the people that you've talked to, do you think him being 26 is a help or a hurt?
So from what I've been told by multiple doctors, age really isn't a huge determinant in this. I think where age can become a determinant is guys who are maybe nearing the end of, whether it's a college career or an NFL career, they don't have the surgery or they rush back from the surgery. Of course, the older you are, the the longer it takes your body to rebound from injuries. I mean, I'm 28 years old, and I feel like I rebound from things slower than I did 5 years ago. But I'm not even an athlete. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge discrepancy between, if you're 26 versus 22. I think where it gets trickier, honestly, is at the NFL level, where you're being paid to play, and doctors raise concerns, and teams don't want to give guys a new contract when they're not sure. In this case, he's going to go out there, he's going to play, and it seems like he's right on track to be just fine.
Joan, great insight. We appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us today on BYU Sports Nation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.